In the late 80s, a maniac appeared in Moscow who raped 17 underage girls and killed 2 of them. The criminal introduced himself to his victims as the director of Mosfilm, drugged them with psychotropic drugs, and then threw them out into the street. From 1988 to 1990, a wave of rapes swept through Moscow, including underage girls. And then the brutal killings began. The investigators decided that this was the work of a serial criminal. The only thing known about him then was that the attacker introduced himself as a director and allegedly selected girls to participate in screen tests. Valery Hazratyan was born in 1958 in Yerevan. At the age of 13, a boy from a prosperous family was seduced by an adult woman. After that, Valera began to lead a hectic sex life, and the more partners he had, the more clearly the guy realized he was attracted only to very small girls. After reading Nabokov's novel, Hazratyan was convinced that Lolita was the very ideal that he needed. While still at school, Valery became interested in psychology and chose the appropriate university for admission, the Republican Pedagogical Institute. After graduating, Hazratyan got a job as a psychologist in a special boarding school for disabled children, and soon he successfully married and moved to his soulmate in Moscow. The marriage did not last long. A year later, Valery ended up in a colony for abuse of a girl, and his wife divorced him. Hazratyan did not remain lonely for long. Soon after his release, he met 40-year-old Muscovite Marina Agayeva and her 14-year-old daughter Tatiana, who suffered from a mental disorder. Very quickly, Valery, with threats and beatings, broke the will of both the cohabitants and the teenage girl. The mother and child became his concubines and accomplices. Valery planned his crimes in advance. From Tatiana's antipsychotics and tranquilizers, he prepared an intoxicating cocktail, made a fake ID of film director Eduard Eldovich Chaplygin from Mosfilm. After that, Chaplygin went to the famous Children's World, popular with both Muscovites and visitors. There, Hazratyan chose his first victim, a girl from Noginsk, who went to the capital for shopping. Valery convinced the schoolgirl to go with him to the shooting of a joint French-Soviet film, painting the film in detail. At home, Hazratyan gave the guest coffee with drugs, raped him in front of the camera, then changed into old clothes and took him to the railway station. The policeman found the girl there, but after the medicines she almost did not remember anything, and therefore she could not help in the search for the criminal. The only thing that bothered the girl was a few bed scenes. Then the man suggested that she drive to the apartment where the film crew was located and conduct a short audition. She agreed. First, the director took her to the entrance, where he asked to portray something, to test acting skills, and then undressed to the waist. Realizing that the invented scheme was working, Hazratyan continued to lure the girls to his home. Now he was in no hurry to get rid of them immediately and kept the victims in captivity for a long time. Those were the scariest days of my life. He kept me tied up in his apartment for 5 days. Every day he raped me 2 or 3 times, in the most perverted ways. He forced me to eat his feces and drink urine, and once he opened my vein and forced me to drink a glass of blood, one of the victims said during interrogation. The more victims became, the more the serial rapist began to get nervous. The man was afraid that one of the victims would remember his appearance and address. Marina and Tanya assisted Valeria. At first they portrayed the film crew, then they fed the prisoners, took them to the toilet, cleaned up after those who were drooling due to drugs or involuntary urination began. Agayeva used her daughter's prescriptions to buy drugs in pharmacies and helped Valery to pour them into the victims' mouths. Hazratyan forced his cohabitant and her daughter to participate in rape. He watched the lesbian scenes with pleasure and often joined them, coming up with an orgy scenario on the go. The maniac did not use condoms. One of the victims became pregnant, but found out about it too late and subsequently gave birth to a child from the maniac. Hazratyan was constantly gnawed by anxiety. He was afraid that sooner or later one of the girls would not lose her memory after the cocktail, and would be able to remember both the rapist and the house where everything happened. In the end, Valery decided it was impossible to release the captives alive. And so that no one understands that the same person works, they must be killed in different ways. The false director stabbed one of the girls, drowned the second in the bathtub. The third, strangled with a belt from a dressing gown and, mistaking for a dead one, threw it into the street, this schoolgirl managed to survive. Lucky were those girls whom Azratyan put on the train, having previously given a lethal dose of pills. They began to vomit, and the people who were nearby had time to call an ambulance. In 1990, what the maniac was so afraid of happened. One of the surviving victims did not completely lose her memory, having managed, albeit not immediately, to restore her memories of the day of the attack. The girl was able to describe the intruder and even showed the street in the house where she was brought to the casting. The victim also remembered. She spent several days in an apartment, from the window of which a monument to a bearded man was visible. The investigators understood and suggested that this could be a monument to Ho Chi Minh near the Akademicheskaya metro station. It was possible to detain the man by pure chance. After persuading another girl to go to him, he caught a taxi. The car turned out to be a dummy. An operative was sitting behind the wheel. After the car door slammed shut, the driver said to the passenger, "Well, Director, have you arrived?" Forensic psychiatrists discovered several oddities in his childhood. In particular, Azratyan preferred to play with girls with dolls than with boys. He had his first sexual experience at the age of 13 with an adult woman. For several years after that, his mistresses became the same age, whom Azratyan easily persuaded to an intimate relationship. During the preliminary investigation, Azratyan was sitting in a cell without neighbors. It was for this reason that he contacted law enforcement officers and frankly, in detail, told them about his crimes. The man was afraid of what cellmates could do to him for violence against minors. For the same reason, at the trial, he demanded capital punishment for himself. As a result, he was sentenced to death. During the investigation, his guilt was proven in committing 17 rapes, 2 of which were associated with murders, and 6 with attempted murders. When asked before the execution what he would like, Azratyan replied, "I want my sentence to be carried out faster and relieve me of this burden." After the trial, he refused to write a cassation appeal and was executed in 1996 in the Butirka pre-trial detention center. Marina Agayeva, who helped him, was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Her daughter was not convicted due to mental disorders, although Azratyan claimed that she also took part in the crimes. This is where our video ends. Friends, I will be very grateful if you just like, write a comment and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for being with us.